Chapter 1. The Beginning of My Struggle. My name is Adam, and I want to tell you about how I learned English. At first, I did not know any English. When I started school, I was an absolute beginner. I did not understand anything in class. Everyone around me was speaking English, and I felt lost. I could not follow the lessons, and I was scared to speak because I did not know the right words. In the beginning, I would sit in class quietly. The teacher would ask questions, but I could not answer. The other students could read and speak English, but I could not. I felt sad because I wanted to learn, but I did not know how. I wanted to talk with my classmates and answer the teacher's questions, but English was so hard for me. Sometimes I would try to understand by watching what the teacher did. If she pointed at the board, I knew she wanted us to write. If she looked at the book, I opened my book too, but I still did not know the meaning of the words. It was frustrating. I felt like everyone else was moving forward, but I was stuck. At home, I wanted to practice, but I didn't know where to start. There were so many English words, and I did not understand their meaning. I did not even know the alphabet very well. I thought, how will I ever learn this language? One day, I went to my teacher and said, I want to learn English, but it is so hard for me. The teacher smiled and said, Don't worry, Adam. Learning a new language is hard at first, but if you practice every day and learn little by little, you will get better. Her words gave me hope. I knew I had to try harder, but I needed a plan. I couldn't just sit in class and feel lost. I needed to find smart ways to learn English. That night, I sat down and thought about my goal. My goal was to understand English so I could talk to my friends, answer the teacher's questions, and read books. I knew it would take time, but I decided that I would not give up. I would learn English, even if it took a long time. The next day, I felt a little better. I told myself that everyone starts as a beginner, and it's okay to make mistakes. I knew that with hard work and smart learning, I would improve. My journey to learn English had begun, but I still had a long way to go. I needed to find ways to study, practice, and use the language every day. This was the start of my story, and I was ready to take the first step. Chapter 2. A New Plan. Learning Smart. After my talk with the teacher, I knew I needed a plan to learn English. I didn't want to feel lost anymore. I wanted to understand the words, the sentences, and the lessons. But I also knew that learning everything at once was impossible. So, I decided to learn English in a smart way, step by step. First, I started with reading. I found some small books with lots of pictures. These books had simple words and sentences. The pictures helped me understand the meaning of the words. I didn't worry about the difficult words. Instead, I focused on the easy ones. I would read a few pages every day. Slowly, I began to understand more words. I also started to keep a notebook. Every time I learned a new word, I would write it down in my notebook. Next to the word, I wrote its meaning in my own language. This way, I could review these words later. I also made sentences with these new words to help me remember them better. For example, if I learned the word apple, I wrote, I eat an apple. I realized that I had to speak English too, not just read. But speaking was hard. I was scared to make mistakes. So I started by practicing speaking alone. In my room, I would stand in front of the mirror and talk to myself. I would say simple things like, "My name is Adam," or "I like football." Even though I was alone, it helped me feel more confident. I practiced my pronunciation and tried to make my sentences sound clear. The next smart idea I had was to use my phone. I downloaded an English learning app. The app had small lessons, and I could practice for a few minutes every day. It had fun games to help me learn new words. I also liked the listening exercises. The app would say a word, and I had to repeat it. This helped me understand how words sound and how to say them correctly. One day I made a plan to learn 5 new words every day. I wrote these words in my notebook, practiced saying them, and made sentences with them. It wasn't too hard because I wasn't trying to learn too many words at once. Little by little, I started to build my vocabulary. I began to use these words in class and with my friends. My teacher noticed my progress. She told me that learning new words is good, but I also needed to use them in conversations. So, I tried to speak English with my friends. At first, I only said a few words, but they helped me. If I said something wrong, they corrected me. I wasn't embarrassed because I knew that making mistakes was part of learning. As time went on, I started feeling more confident. I was learning a few new words every day, practicing speaking and understanding more when I read. My plan was working. I wasn't trying to learn too fast or do too much at once. Instead, I focused on small steps, and these small steps helped me get better each day. The smart way to learn was helping me. I was no longer lost in class. I understood more, and I wasn't afraid to speak. I knew I still had a lot to learn, but I also knew that with my plan, I could do it. Chapter 3. Speaking Practice. Finding Confidence. After learning new words and practicing reading, I knew it was time to start speaking more. Speaking English was the hardest part for me. I was nervous and scared of making mistakes. But I realized that if I didn't practice speaking, I would never get better. I started by practicing alone. I stood in front of the mirror in my room and talked to myself. At first, I only said simple sentences like, "My name is Adam," or "I like to play football." I practiced introducing myself and asking simple questions like, "How are you?" I would repeat these sentences over and over until they sounded clear. Speaking alone gave me confidence because no one could hear me, so I wasn't worried about making mistakes. It also helped me get used to hearing my own voice in English. The more I practiced, the more comfortable I felt speaking the words out loud. After practicing alone for a while, I knew I needed to start speaking with other people. I began by talking to my friends at school. At first, I would only say a few words in English. I would say things like, "Good morning," or "What is your name?" My friends were patient with me. They understood that I was learning and tried to help me. One day, during lunch, I decided to speak in English with one of my classmates. I asked him, "How are you today?" He smiled and answered, "I'm fine, thank you." How are you? At that moment, I felt proud because I had started a conversation in English, and he understood me. My friend and I continued talking, and even though I made a few mistakes, he helped me. He corrected my sentences and taught me new words. I realized that making mistakes wasn't so scary. In fact, each mistake taught me something new. The more I spoke, the more I learned. I also found that asking questions was a good way to practice speaking. Whenever I didn't understand something in class, I would raise my hand and ask, "Can you explain this, please?" Or, "What does this word mean?" My teacher was happy to see me trying, and she always helped me with my questions. Asking questions made me feel brave, and it helped me understand more. Another thing that helped me was talking slowly. In the beginning, I tried to speak too fast, and I would make mistakes. But my teacher told me that it's better to speak slowly and clearly. This way, people can understand me better, and I have time to think about the words. So I slowed down, and it made a big difference. I also learned to listen carefully when people spoke to me. I realized that speaking English wasn't just about saying words, it was also about understanding what the other person was saying. When I had conversations, I focused on listening to the other person's words. If I didn't understand something, I would ask them to repeat it. This helped me stay calm during conversations and made me a better listener. As I practiced more, my confidence grew. I wasn't afraid to speak in class anymore. When the teacher asked a question, I would raise my hand and answer in English. Sometimes I still made mistakes, but I didn't feel embarrassed. I knew that each mistake was a chance to learn. Speaking English became easier the more I practiced. I realized that the key to getting better was practice, practice, practice. It didn't matter if I made mistakes. What mattered was that I was trying, I was learning, and with each conversation I was improving. Now I could speak with my friends in English, and I wasn't scared to talk in front of the class. I felt proud of myself for working hard and being brave enough to speak. The more I practiced, the more confident I became. I knew I still had a lot to learn, but I was no longer afraid. Speaking English was fun, and I was getting better every day. Chapter 4: Smart Reading. As I got better at speaking, I realized that reading was also a great way to improve my English. Reading helped me learn new words, understand sentences, and see how English works. But at first, reading English felt hard. The books had many words I didn't know, and I often got stuck. I knew I needed to read in a smart way to make it easier for me. I started with comic books. Comic books have pictures, and the sentences are short. The pictures helped me understand what was happening in the story, even when I didn't know all the words. I also liked how the characters in the comics talked like real people. It helped me learn how to speak naturally. Next, I found some children's books. These books were simple, with easy words and short sentences. I would read 1 or 2 pages every day. If I didn't know a word, I didn't stop reading right away. Instead, I tried to guess the meaning from the pictures and the sentence. This way, I didn't lose the flow of the story. I also kept my dictionary close. After finishing a few pages, I would look up the words I didn't understand. I wrote these words in my notebook and practiced using them in sentences. But I didn't try to remember too many new words at once. I focused on learning a few words each day. One day, my teacher told me about reading stories online. She showed me a website with short stories for beginners. These stories were fun to read, and they helped me practice. Some of the stories even had audio, so I could listen to the words while I read. This helped me improve my pronunciation too. I also learned another smart reading technique: skimming. When I read a long text or story, I didn't have to understand every word. I learned to skim through the text first. Skimming means reading quickly to get the main idea. After skimming, I would go back and read more carefully. This saved me time, and it helped me focus on the important parts of the text. Watching English cartoons with subtitles was another fun way I learned to read better. The cartoons had simple language, and the subtitles helped me follow along. I would watch the cartoon and read the words on the screen at the same time. This helped me improve both my reading and my listening skills. After a few months of reading comic books, children's stories, and short online stories, I noticed that I was understanding more. I didn't need to use my dictionary as often, and I could read longer sentences without getting stuck. I felt proud because I could see my progress. One day, I decided to challenge myself by reading a chapter book. At first, it was hard. There were many words I didn't know and the sentences were longer, but I didn't give up. I used the same smart reading techniques. I skimmed the pages first, guessed the meaning of words, and looked up only the most important words in my dictionary. Little by little, I made it through the first chapter. Reading in English was still not easy, but I could see that it was getting better. Each time I read, I learned something new. I was starting to understand how sentences were put together, how words worked in context, and how stories flowed in English. One of the most important things I learned was not to stop every time I didn't understand a word. If I stopped too much, it slowed me down, and I lost the story. So, I learned to keep reading and trust that I would understand the meaning later. This gave me more confidence, and reading became more enjoyable. By practicing reading every day, I was able to understand more and more. I was no longer afraid to pick up a new book or story. I knew that reading in a smart way was helping me grow, and I was excited to keep learning. Now I could read simple stories, comic books, and even some chapter books. I still had a long way to go, but I felt proud of how much I had improved. Reading was no longer a challenge. It was fun, and I knew it was making my English stronger every day. Chapter 5. Success: Speaking and Understanding English. After months of hard work, I could see that I was getting better at English. I could speak with my friends at school. I could understand more of what the teacher said in class. I was also reading more and enjoying it. But the best part was that I wasn't afraid of English anymore. I had worked hard, and now I could see the results. One day during class, the teacher asked a question. Usually I would sit quietly, hoping she wouldn't call on me. But this time, I raised my hand. I answered the question in English, and it felt amazing. I made a few mistakes, but the teacher understood me. She smiled and said, "Good job, Adam." That made me so proud. I had come so far from the boy who didn't understand anything in class. My friends noticed my progress too. I wasn't shy to talk with them in English anymore. We would have conversations at lunch and after school. Sometimes I would still forget a word, but I knew how to ask them for help. "What's the word for?" I would ask, and they would tell me. It didn't feel embarrassing anymore because I knew that asking questions was part of learning. I also started to enjoy watching English TV shows. At first, I only watched cartoons with subtitles. But now, I could watch shows without subtitles and still understand most of what was happening. I could even catch some of the jokes, which made me laugh. It felt good to understand and enjoy something in English without needing help. Reading had also become a big part of my life. I started reading longer books with more difficult words. The stories were exciting, and I loved learning new words and ideas from them. I didn't have to stop and look up every word anymore. I could guess the meaning of the words from the sentences around them. This made reading faster and more fun. One day, my teacher gave us a big assignment. We had to write a story in English. At first, I was nervous. Writing a whole story in English sounded hard. But then I remembered everything I had learned. I knew how to write simple sentences, and I knew how to use the new words I had learned from reading. I also knew that it was okay to make mistakes. So I sat down and started writing my story. I wrote about a boy who went on an adventure in the forest. I used all the new words I had learned in the past few months. After finishing the story, I showed it to my teacher. She read it and gave me feedback. There were some mistakes, but she told me it was a great effort, and she was proud of me. This made me realize how far I had come. When I started, I didn't know any English. I felt lost, scared, and unsure of myself. But now I could speak, read, and write in English. I wasn't perfect, but I had learned so much. I felt confident in my ability to keep improving. I also learned that working smart was the key to my success. I didn't try to learn everything at once. I took small steps every day, learning a few new words, reading simple books, and speaking whenever I could. These small steps added up, and now I was able to use English in ways I never thought possible. Another thing that helped me was not being afraid of mistakes. At first, I felt embarrassed every time I said something wrong. But over time, I learned that mistakes are part of the process. Every time I made a mistake, I learned from it. And each mistake made me better. Now, I am excited to keep learning English. I know that I will continue to improve as long as I keep practicing and learning in a smart way. I have reached a point where I can have conversations, understand TV shows, read books, and even write stories in English. But I know that my journey doesn't end here. There is always more to learn. Looking back, I feel proud of myself. I worked hard, and I used smart learning techniques. I started as an absolute beginner, but now I am confident in my English. The journey was difficult at times, but it was worth it. I learned that with patience, practice, and smart work, I could achieve my goals. And now I'm excited for the future. I know that as long as I keep learning, there's no limit to what I can do with English. Hope you have enjoyed the reading.